Hi folks, in this episode we're going to be talking about Terraplane Blues by Robert Johnson. This is a song that was recorded exactly 100 years ago and yet has an incredibly futuristic time feel. Robert Johnson has been hyped to death by baby boomer rock guitarists and folkies, so Bob Dylan, Eric Clapton, the Rolling Stones, Jerry Garcia. I mean, all these guys have just praised Robert Johnson to the skies and covered him. And on the one hand, yeah, he's a little overhyped. But on the other hand, I think he's actually somewhat underhyped. People have made a big deal about his songwriting, which is incredible. And there's this whole mythology around him, all this nonsense about him selling his soul to the devil, blah, 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 blah. But I actually don't think we've paid enough attention to his guitar playing and his time feel. He has a really extraordinary sense of rhythm and was doing some stuff 100 years ago that few of his followers and imitators have really fully adopted. And yeah, I just think there's a lot more to his music than the baby boomer rock stars fully seem to have appreciated.
And I feel so lonesome. You have me when I'm on. And I feel so lonesome. You have me when I'm on. They've been driving my Terraplane for you since I've been gone.
The lyrics are a pretty straightforward sexual innuendo comparing some woman to this car, which was made by the Hudson Automobile Company. It was pretty popular in the 1930s, kind of a cheap, all-purpose car for the masses. So the present day equivalent would be like a Honda Civic, a regular car. Yeah. There are a couple of different twists about this tune. One of those twists involves the chords. The stereotypical 12-bar blues in B flat would use three chords: B flat 7, E flat 7, and F7. Here is how you would expect the chords to go in Terraplane Blues. B flat 7, E flat 7, B flat 7, F7, E flat 7. And when you look at covers of this song on YouTube and elsewhere, that is pretty much how people play it. However, Robert Johnson does not play an F7 chord where you expect the F7 chord to go.
They've been driving my Terraplane for you since I've been gone.
In fact, he doesn't play any chord there. He just plays like a little bit of a riff that kind of implies B flat 7, but really it's just a riff. It's not a chord at all. And he does that in every verse of the song. So for example, here's the fourth verse.
I've been driving my Terraplane down for you since I've been gone.
Yeah, same thing every time. The more faithful interpreters of this song on YouTube and elsewhere recognize that, but it is pretty common for people to just play that F7 chord, that 5 chord. And I think it's significant that Robert Johnson is eliding and omitting the 5 chord because he's not the only blues musician to do this. There are other blues musicians, for example, John Lee Hooker and Lightnin' Hopkins, who when you expect that 5 chord in the 12-bar blues form, they just don't play it. So Lightnin' Hopkins very often plays 4. John Lee Hooker tends to play 4. Ray Charles also sometimes uses 4 instead of 5, where you expect 5. And there's not a very clear explanation for why this is. I mean, one theory is that 5/7 to 1 is the perfect authentic cadence. It's the defining harmonic gesture of Western European classical music and vernacular music for that matter. And In an American context, it's the sound of Europe. It's the sound of white people. And so the theory goes that, some of these blues musicians and later jazz musicians were deliberately not using the 5-chord pointedly because that was the white man's chord. And Robert Johnson certainly never spoke about this, so it's hard to know what he was thinking with this choice. But anyway, that is a theory of it. So another thing that's very striking about this song and about Robert Johnson's music in general is the meter changes a lot. Like, he mostly plays in 4/4, but he adds and drops beats pretty much at will. So Terraplane Blues actually starts out in 3/4. And then it switches to 4/4 for most of the first verse.
And I feel so lonesome. You have me when I'm on. And I feel so lonesome. You have me when I'm on.
But then there's a bar of 3.
They've been driving my
And then there's a bar of 2.
Driving my Terraplane for you since I've been gone.
And yeah, just all the way through the tune, he's adding and dropping beats. And I don't think it's because he can't count to 4. He has great time feel, so this has got to be a choice, but I don't know, was there some sort of plan to it, or was he just kind of doing it in the moment? It's difficult to say. But the most striking thing about this tune, and the reason that I wanted to talk about it, is the swing feel. To understand what Robert Johnson is doing with this swing, first we got to understand what swing is. So let's say we're playing blues in regular 4/4, and each measure has 4 beats in it, like so. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can divide each of those beats in half. So if each beat is a quarter note, then you can divide the quarters into eighth notes, like so. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So here's what swing is. Swing is lengthening the first eighth note in each pair, in each beat, and shortening the second eighth note, like so. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So sometimes you see swing written as 12/8 shuffle feel, or you see at the top of a piece of sheet music 2 eighth notes equals a tied triplet. So what they're trying to communicate with that is that the first eighth note in each pair, the on-beat subdivision, is twice as long as the off-beat subdivision, the second eighth note in the pair. And you could think of it as dividing up the eighth note into thirds, and then the first eighth note is 2/3 of the beat long, and the last eighth note is only 1/3 of the beat. So that is a widely used swing feel, especially in the blues. However, it's not the only one. There can be any ratio in the length between the on-beat and the off-beat subdivisions. So sometimes musicologists like to talk about the beat to upbeat ratio. So straight eighth notes have a ratio of 1:1. The length of the on-beat subdivision is the same as the length of the off-beat subdivision. In shuffle feel, in 12/8 shuffle feel, that is a beat to upbeat ratio of 2:1. So the on-beat eighth note is twice as long as the off-beat eighth note. But you can have any ratio. So here is a light swing that has a ratio of 1.5:1, meaning the on-beat subdivision is 1.5 times as long as the off-beat subdivision. This is a nice feel, yeah? Because it does swing, it's got that laid-back quality to it, but it's lighter and more subtle than the full 12/8 shuffle, the full 2:1. This 1.5:1 is more like the way jazz musicians swing. So now you got this vocabulary. What is the swing feel of Terraplane Blues? Well, let's listen to it.
terraplane for you since I've been gone.
What you might notice is that Robert Johnson is changing the swing feel pretty dramatically and pretty constantly. So he starts out playing full shuffle. But then as soon as he starts singing, he switches to this more like 1.5 to 1 light swing.
And I feel so lonesome. You have me when I'm on.
And then he switches to just fully straight eighth notes.
And I feel so lonesome. You have me when I'm on.
Then back to light swing. Then back to straight eighth notes.
They've been driving my terraplane for you since I've been gone.
I mean, that is wild. Okay, and then in verse 4, he starts out shuffling 2 to 1.
Now you know the cars ain't even buzzing. The generator won't get that far. Or in a bad condition you gotta have. These batteries charged, I'm crying, please.
Then on the 4 chord on E flat 7, he switches to light swing, like 1.5 to 1.
Crying, please, please, don't do me wrong.
Then back to shuffle, back to light swing, back to shuffle, and then ends the verse completely straight.
Don't do me wrong. I've been dying my terraplane now for since I've been gone.
That is bananas. And there is a further wrinkle, which is when he's playing straight eighth notes, he's actually swinging his 16th notes. This is like another layer of subtlety to swing. Since 1960, people have tended to keep their eighth notes straight. But they have tended to swing at the 16th note level. So for example, here is the intro drum groove to Superstition by Stevie Wonder. And Stevie is playing those eighth notes completely straight, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and, but he's swinging the 16th notes, 1 E and a 2 E and a 3 E and a 4 E and a 1. So that's like the characteristic sound of funk, is straight eighth notes and swinging 16th notes. And the thing is, in Terraplane Blues, when Robert Johnson is playing straight eighth notes, he does have implied 16th note swing feel. And you can actually put the beat from Superstition on top of these straight eighth note sections of Terraplane Blues, and it fits pretty perfectly.
You have me when I'm on. And I feel so lonesome. You have me when I'm on.
Generally, when people cover this song, they do not vary their swing feel. So here's a representative example. This is a performance of the song by Dan Bubien and the Delta Struts, and I just found this by typing Terraplane Blues Robert Johnson cover into YouTube. This is one of the first results. And I don't mean to pick on these guys because I think they play the song perfectly fine, but they just kind of pick a swing feel and stick to it the entire time.
Well, I feel so lonesome. Hear me when I'm on. And I feel so lonesome. Hear me when I'm on. Who's been driving my terraplane now? Since I've been gone. I said, flash your lights, mom. This horn won't even blow.
Okay, but maybe that's unfair. Maybe that's just some guy on YouTube. But like, what about the professionals? Yeah. Like, what about Eric Clapton, who has made multiple albums of Robert Johnson songs and who is clearly deeply, deeply invested in Robert Johnson and his music and has clearly studied it very closely. So in his recording of Terraplane Blues, he does this really nice kind of in between straight and shuffle feel, this kind of light swing ratio, but it's basically just steady the entire time. Like he doesn't really vary it.
And I feel so lonesome. You hear me when I'm on. And I feel so lonesome. You hear me when I'm on. Who've been driving my terraplane now? You since I've been gone.
He does shuffle a little bit in certain points, like a little bit wider, but in general, he just sort of has this feel and sticks to it. And I am an outspoken anti-fan of Eric Clapton, but I think he plays this tune pretty well. I don't love the way he sings it, but whatever. But yeah, he's not varying his swing feel the way that Robert Johnson does. Very occasionally you see somebody on YouTube who is like really meticulously recreating the swing feel, but yeah, it's pretty rare. And, you know, I listened to this music for a lot of years before I ever even noticed this. Or if I did notice it, you know, maybe I just thought, oh, it's Robert Johnson. He's just being kind of loose and casual with his time. I no longer think he's being loose and casual. I think he is exercising very precise control over his time feel. And once I came back to this music after having spent a lot of time studying hip hop and doing this very intense computer assisted analysis of like the subtleties of Jay Dilla's time feel and stuff like that, Terraplane Blues came up in shuffle and I was like, wow, what is going on with the swing in this tune? Is he really like going from straight to swing and back at random intervals? Wow, he really is. Like you can use Ableton Live to go in there and see where his guitar strums fall on the grid. And indeed, yeah, he really is varying his time feel all the way through the tune. Now, I haven't gone through all his other music to see how much he's doing this. That's a project for the future, I suppose. But yeah, it definitely is something I will be investigating now that I know that this is something to listen for. And again, Robert Johnson is not the only blues musician to approach time this way. John Lee Hooker will vary his swing feel. So in Boogie Chillen, he's mostly playing this very wide shuffle, but he does straighten out his eighths in a couple of places.
Out there, yeah, people, yeah, they were really having a ball. Yes, I know. Boogie Chillen.
And it took me a long time to be able to articulate, like, what is it that he's doing on these riffs that sound so striking? And I couldn't really figure it out until I put the track into Ableton Live and, like, looked at where the guitar strums were on the grid. So this raises an interesting question, which is, if you're gonna perform Terraplane Blues, like, what is your responsibility? Do you need to recreate Robert Johnson's performance exactly? Like, should you count through it and do all of his added and dropped beats? Should you try to replicate his varying swing feel? Or is it more about like the general idea of being flexible with your meter and being flexible with your swing feel? And you don't have to do it exactly the way Robert Johnson does it, but you should treat the meter and the swing ratio as expressive dimensions of the music, and then you vary them how you see fit. Or should we just not be trying to recreate Robert Johnson at all and just do these tunes however we do them? And, you know, if people want to hear his interpretations, they should just listen to recordings of him. I don't know the answer to that. I have, somewhat to my embarrassment, done Kind-Hearted Woman blues in public when I was in college and kind of less thoughtful about these things than I am now. Yeah, I did do that tune in public a couple times, and I love it, love it, love it. I love all his music, but now I'm sort of feeling like I should not really be singing those songs. I don't really have anything to add to them. I mean, I'm happy to teach them. I'm happy to point people to them and help them appreciate them and enjoy them because I think, they're wonderful. I for sure think that people should be listening to Robert Johnson himself and not the Rolling Stones or Eric Clapton or whoever as they're covering this stuff. I'm teaching this new class in the fall on the history of 20th century American popular music, and we will for sure be talking about Robert Johnson, but not as a precursor to rock and roll, because, in the 60s, these guys like the Stones and Eric Clapton and Bob Dylan did talk a lot about Robert Johnson as an influence, but that was sort of a hipstery affectation of theirs at the time, and it wasn't really a historical statement about where rock and roll actually came from. I mean, yes, the blues was an influence on rock, but it wasn't the big one. In A History of Rock Music in 500 Songs, Andrew Hickey convincingly argues that the main sources for rock were Western swing, hillbilly boogie, jump blues, and country and R&B, piano-based R&B, and that rock musicians did not get into the Delta blues until much later during the 1960s folk revival. So yeah, I'm going to bring up Robert Johnson. I mean, partially just because the kids should know who Robert Johnson is, but more in the context of his reception history in the 1960s, because in the 1930s, he was not very popular or influential. I'm drawing on Andrew Hickey's model here because in Andrew Hickey's history, he focuses on Robert Johnson when he's talking about Clapton in the 60s. We don't want to only talk about Robert Johnson in terms of Eric Clapton's feelings about him. But if you are doing a history of rock music in particular, yeah, I would say that is the appropriate way to handle him. Anyway, whether you care about rock history or not, whether you care about Eric Clapton or not, yeah, I do think Robert Johnson deserves being listened to with fresh ears because, man, there is a lot going on in that music. Thank you very much for listening.
And I feel so lonesome